Salvete discipuli. Today's video is the last lesson in Latin for the New Millennium, Volume 2. It's also the last lesson in Chapter 15. And it is on a use of the gerundive called the passive periphrastic. Now, you have learned two other uses of the gerundive, including it being used as the future passive participle, and it's being used as a phrase, a construction that is sort of unique to Latin in that it takes over the function of a gerund. This third use, the passive periphrastic, passive periphrastic, is probably the most common use of the gerundive. Okay, now it's a pretty impressive name for a construction, but the passive periphrastic is fairly straightforward. It conveys necessity, okay? So something must be done, something had to be done, something will have to be done, some kind of necessity, okay? Here's how you form it. It's two words. The first word is the gerundive, and the ending on the gerundive is going to be the same gender, number, and case as the subject. The second word is a form of the verb to be. So, sum ss, sum ss sunt, aram aras arat, aramas aras arant, or aro aras arit, aramas aras rent. You can have a passive periphrastic within indirect statement. So you could have the second word in the passive periphrastic being essay. Okay. And it translates, as I said before, conveying necessity. So if you have a passive periphrastic with a present tense use of the form of the verb to be, it's going to translate must be. That's the other thing. Remember that it's called the passive periphrastic. So it's always going to be passive. Something must be done. There is a way to translate it actively, but it's not actually active. It's just that we're kind of changing it around in English to make it sound better, but we'll talk more about that in a second. If the form of the verb to be is in the past tense, the passive periphrastic translates something had to be done. And if it's in the future, it translates something will have to be done. Okay. One last thing about the passive periphrastic. Now, when we have used passive verbs in the past, we show who is doing the action of that passive verb by using an ablative of agent, right? The passive periphrastic does not use an ablative of agent. It uses a dative of agent, okay? It translates the same way. It translates by whoever or whatever, whoever really. But it's a dative and not an ablative, okay? Remember that the ablative of agent uses a preposition ab, whereas the dative of agent does not use any preposition. So there. Let's look at a couple examples. So this first sentence, illa femina omnibus laudanda est. Okay, we have our subject, illa femina, that woman, laudanda est, must be praised. And now we have the dative of agent telling us who must be doing this action. That woman must be praised omnibus, by all. Okay. Second example, hic liber mihi legendus erit. So hic liber being our subject, this book, legendus erit, future. So this book will have to be read, mihi, by me, dative of agent. Okay. And you guys should be writing down these translations and also identifying these dative of agents, because this will help you as we start practicing, we practice translating the passive periphrastic. Pax ducibus nostris patenda erat. Pax being our subject, patenda erat. Peace must, erat being a past tense and imperfect. So peace had to be sought, ducibus nostris, by our leaders. Okay. Now, the most famous use of the passive periphrastic, probably in Latin, was a phrase, a little sentence, Carthago delenda est. In the 2nd century BC, a fairly well-known Republican politician, Cato the Elder, used to incorporate Carthago delenda est Carthage must be destroyed into his speeches. Now, if you remember from the Roman history that we did last year during Latin 2, you'll remember that the Romans fought a total of 3 wars with the Carthaginians, right? The First Punic War, the Second Punic War, and the Third Punic War. The Second Punic War being the one that lasted the longest and also was the most destructive for the Romans. That Hannibal, he was hard to beat. Between the Second and the Third Punic Wars, Carthage kept bouncing back. This isn't actually surprising if you remember where Carthage is situated in the Mediterranean in North Africa. It has a great location for trade throughout the Mediterranean Sea. So even though it had lost the First Punic War to the Romans, it had lost the Second Punic War to the Romans, Carthage kept bouncing back and had once again become a powerful and wealthy city. Cato went to Carthage, looked around, could not believe his eyes at how well Carthage was doing, and started to worry that Carthage could once again be a threat to the Romans. So in an effort to encourage the Romans not just to engage the Carthaginians one last time in a war, which they will, but to completely destroy the city, to make it that it cannot bounce back in the future and become another threat, or become a threat once more to the Romans. So he would incorporate this passive periphrastic Carthago delenda est into his speeches and encourage other Romans to say the same, to drum up support for the total annihilation of Carthage, which, by the way, will happen at the end of the Third Punic War, if you remember correctly. The Romans razed the city and sowed salt into the earth. So there you go. All right. I hope you took good notes. I will see you in class, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Buona te.